Good evening. My name is Joseph Gerson. On behalf of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security and Massachusetts Peace Action, I want to welcome you to this evening's report back from a Chinese geopolitics conference by my friend and long-term colleague, Reiner Braun. Reiner is speaking to us from Berlin, where it's already 11 p.m. And while his image may be darker than any of us would like, I'm sure he has a lot of light to share with us. So just listen well. I also want to thank Mariana Fernandez, who is serving as our Zoom guru this evening, as she often does. Last month, Reiner participated in an international conference in Shanghai, organized by the Chungui Institute for Development and Strategic Studies, and also by the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung. It was titled Socialist Perspectives on International Relations and Security Policies in a Historic Shift Toward a Multipolar World. Following the conference, Reiner also met with a number of Chinese foreign policy analysts and got his first views of 21st century China. Until recently, Reiner was the General Secretary of the International Peace Bureau, based in Berlin. He has decades of experience in the German and European peace movements and was deeply involved with the Max Planck Institute's planning for the Einstein Year. He has also been a leading figure in the promotion of common security diplomacy, most recently with our Common Security in the Indo-Pacific project, which will be issued next week. Frankly, with U.S., allied, Chinese, and to a lesser degree Russian military forces engaging in provocative military operations from the South China Sea to Taiwan, and even now the Alaskan coast, the competition, as well as the competition and the love and interest by these powers for the nations of the global South, led me particularly eager to hear Reiner's report back. Again, to appreciate that we're also in a situation where the United States and China have a number of common interests, and I expect we'll hear about them as well this evening. In this program, Reiner will share some of what he learned about in terms of Chinese and others' perspective on the earth-shaking geopolitical changes that are underway and their implications for peace, justice, and climate advocates. We didn't set a time for Reiner's introductory remarks. I hope they will be fulsome. And with our evenings webinar, we'll have plenty of time. We've given ourselves a full hour. Please post your questions, but not your comments, in the Q&A box. After Reiner's talk, and maybe after a question or two from me, we will turn to your questions. Thank you for joining us, and Reiner, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joseph, for the invitation to this webinar, and thank you for giving me the chance to give, and I will be very cautious, to give impressions about my trip. I'm not I'm not an expert about Chinese politics, and it was my first trip since more than 15 years to China. So I learned a lot, and I will share with you some of my impressions of this meeting. Let me first say the conference I was attending was a pre-conference for a big international conference the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation and several Chinese institutes are organizing for next year, which has a little bit the title of the New World Order, looking from the East, looking from the European perspective. And what we were doing, we will collect ideas and thoughts for such a conference. This is on one side, the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation office in Beijing, together with 6 or 7 Chinese institutions, including the Fudan University and the Shanghai Institute for International Studies. Both are institutes which are, on one side, closely connected to the foreign policy of China, on the other side, a part of the international debate about new security structures and new security order. And maybe I start with one of the first impressions. This was the impression of Shanghai. And I will say it in one sentence. I hope you are not too angry with me when I'm saying, when I'm looking to Shanghai, Manhattan is really a village. Seeing all these high scrapers and the new part of the city. When I was last time there, Pandung, the part of the other side of the river, was 5 or 6 buildings for companies. Now it's a city of 1.5 million people, including the biggest skyscrapers or some of the biggest skyscrapers in the world, and many, many, many institutions, big buildings, and it is really amazing to see the development of China, and it is impressive. And the second one I would like to say is, I think we had some really quite open discussion. Open, maybe not in the kind of discussion we know from our discussions in your country or in my home country. But I think it was quite open when we are looking back to the Chinese tradition in international debates and in international discussions. And let me say maybe 2 points which I really learned. One point of this open discussion was the intensive discussion of the big youth unemployment they have. And this youth unemployment is really enlarging from year to year because too many young people are looking for working places. And when they are finding working places, they are not equal to the education they have. Many of them, really thousands, are working in these new delivery systems, bringing the goods and the food to the people. I was asking the people where I can find a supermarket for going a little bit shopping. And there's really no supermarket any longer because everything was ordered online and was brought by these delivery systems to the people. And these are really jobs for highly educated young people. This shows a big problem for engaging the young generation in really a working system which is in relation to their education. And, the second really open question, which was quite controversial to discuss, is this question between market economy and socialist principles. Market economy means profit and capitalistic development, means quite free market. Socialist principles means much more and means partly overcoming profit system. How are these two related in a system which is calling themselves socialist system? And there are a lot of controversial discussion about how free should be the so-called free market and how much the free market must be organized by state influence, by society influenced, by general development, by common goods. And this is also a very controversial discussion from my point of view in the countries. And there are a lot of open questions, which means how much privatization is needed, what is with the common goods, what are common goods, how much privatization, for example, in the healthcare system is good for a system, and how much it must be organized in a more human way. These are discussions which were even under our Chinese colleagues, which were sitting with us around the table, controversial. They don't have the same point of view to these two questions. There are definitely more, but I really would focus on these two key points, which are what I learned that there is in the country controversial discussions. Coming back to the global situation, and I think we have to notice that maybe others than in our countries, there is a long-term global strategy for international politics. It is fixed in the so-called Global Security Initiative, which was announced first by Xi Jinping on the Boa Forum for Asia in 2022, and then deepened by his speeches in Moscow 23 and by the Chinese speeches at the Munich Security Conference. But this Global Security Initiative is only one of three leading initiatives for the international politics of China. And the two other is the Global Development Initiative, mainly related to their relations to Africa, but also to other countries in Asia, and the Global Civilization Initiative, which is, when I would say it in easy words, the question of environmental development, environmental safety, and climate protection. These three initiatives are really along these three initiatives, China is developing their international politics under, and this is very clear, accepted and acknowledged by the Chinese colleagues, under a situation of confrontation, mainly with the United States of America, with the government of the United States of America, but also more and more with the European Union. And they're aware of these confrontation. And what China is trying to do is to overcome the confrontation and coming to a politics which they are calling a policy of common security. Common security, this is interesting, is mentioned in the party documents of the last party of the Communist Party, and it's also mentioned in the three backgrounds document I mentioned. What are the consequences of these for the day-to-day politics of China? And when I was there was a summit between Asian Union, between African Union, between Africa and China. So quite all the leaders of quite all African countries were in China, and they had a common meeting for a new 5 years plan for their relations, and Xi and the leaders of China had bilateral talks with quite every of these Chinese leaders. And it was interesting that the reports about this meeting was always the same time in the national TV. The national TV was intensively reporting about this, but there was no difference between the big countries like South Africa and a small country like Togo or Benin. All these meetings were mentioned and shown to the Chinese people. So China really tried to develop an intensive context to Africa and the African Union. And this is mainly economically context, but also to develop more political common strategies to change the political international atmosphere for a more multipolar world. That is the background of all their activities. And in this case, a key element of the Chinese strategy is to strengthen the BRICS, coordinating of the BRICS, the work in and with the BRICS countries. On one side, China, everyone was saying, BRICS is weaker than we announced it publicly, weaker in developing an economic and financial strategy. China don't believe that there will be a new financial system very quick. The US dominance of the financial market and the dominance of the dollar is much too strong, and China is much more depending from these relations that they can overthrow it very quick. They have no illusions that there will be a quick way, but they want to go away to a new financial and monetary system in the world, step by step. And other countries are pushing much more for a quicker developing of these change of financial system. The main pushes are coming from, on one side, from South Africa, interestingly, and definitely from Russia. And the Chinese were also very open when they are speaking about Russia. I will come back to Ukraine a little bit later. But the general feeling is that China is cautious to develop too strong context to Russia. They have the strategic partnership, but they want to go their own independent way in their foreign policy. There is an overlap of interest, but there is not a coordinating system between China and Russia in all international affairs. For example, there is no coordination when we are discussing West Asia. China is very carefully taking care that they develop their own politics against West Asia, but also the same to Africa. And there are a lot of problems by the common work for getting the more resources, oil and gas, to China. These difficulties are on one side that Russia even want to sell more oil and gas, but China also want to have a multipolar selling of oil and gas and not depending from one partner. So this is also the background that this new gas and oil pipeline, which they are discussing through Siberia, is not finally decided when it starts and how it starts. So the independence in their foreign policy is a very important part for China. So China on one side relies, when I understand this correctly, on multipolar agreements and contacts like BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. On other sides, they are highly interested in developing bilateral contacts to the different countries in the world. All this happened on a long-term strategy, and this was, from my learning process, a deep difference to these day-to-day politics we are seeing in Europe, and I think also in the United States, we are jumping from one step to the next step, and we are missing a long-term strategy. China has a long-term strategy, and the main year for China is the year 2049, with the 100 years of existence of the People's Republic of China. And between them, they have these important days and years with 2028 and 2035, but they have really a long-term strategy, and they develop their day-to-day tactics along these long-term strategy. This was really an interesting learning process to see that there is not a jumping from one point to the next. Some points to some key challenges in the world. Ukraine, China, the Chinese foreign politics don't believe that the end of the war will be very quick. They have the special rapporteur and the special diplomats developing their relation to China. What China is trying to do is to develop an international contact group which is preparing the negotiations and the round table with Russia and Ukraine. This international coordinating group has, from their understanding, two main players. This is China and Brazil, but also the African Union. And the Chinese are really, in all the discussions, are deeply disappointed about the Europeans, above all about the Germans and France, that they don't start preparing a little bit more independent role, putting their own interests in the middle point of their politics and their activities. You all know that one of the big losers of this war economically is Germany, and the Chinese are always surprised that the Germans are following the United States foreign policy to 150% and have no own stones where they are following their mainly economic interests. So that was an interesting discussion, and the Chinese are trying to get in contact with the Germans and the French as key players in Europe for convincing them to play a more independent politics. But their belief is that this will be not so quick. When you ask me the question if they are being for Trump or for Harris, they are very cautious. They are playing with both. And I'm absolutely sure that in their diplomat internal circus, they have strategies for both, how to react to both. They know that Trump is not reliable in their foreign politics, and that he is doing what he believes, and that he also by racist behavior hates the Chinese, but they also recognize and know that the Democrats are very open to go, to say it very easy, to quite every war. So they have both ambivalent feelings and understanding to both. Second point, to Middle East. Middle East, they were very proud that they could develop these relations or these new relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And they really said that they changed the political structure and the power structure in the region. I have to say that my trip was before the last developments in the region. So the Lebanon activities had not started, and also the first attacks of Iran against Israel has not started. So, but they know that there will be no military solution of these conflicts. And it's only a question how many victims, how many people are suffering. That there is a political need for a political solution. And their ideas are going in this direction. And I think, Joseph, this is our old idea that a conference of cooperation and common security for the Middle and Near East is needed, where all parties are sitting around the table in a long-term process. They are very much having in mind the process which lead to the OSCE Agreement of Helsinki in 1975. Over many years, have bilateral elements, but at the end, coming to a multilateral process. And before you ask me the question, I will say to Taiwan, and I will quote the answer I got several times: there will be no war in the family and against the family. We need a peaceful solution for the Taiwan conflict. The red line is definitely the independence of Taiwan. Under declaring independence, many things are possible. And China is trying to develop contacts to Taiwan on a low level, but so many as possible. And all of them, we must not agree with it, are sure that the time will come that Taiwan will come back to the family of China. That is a deep conviction from quite everyone with whom we are talking. Interesting for me was what they were saying to Europe. And to say it easily, they were saying Europe has no role any longer in international politics, so long it will be not becoming more independent from the foreign politics of the United States of America. They were, many of them, because, you know, from these maybe 30 people which I had deeper discussion with, 10 of them were trained in Germany, at German universities. Some of them were really speaking quite well German. They were deeply disappointed about Germany. And they were always saying, you know, look back to Willy Brandt and others, which were developing the politics of common security, cooperation, dialogue, and even disarmament. And so they were deeply disappointed about Europe, and above all about the influence of East Europe in a very aggressive and confrontational politics in Europe. So that was a point, a key point for them. So let me say to peace some two or three words. They believe that that confrontation will be the leading position in the next years. They have no illusions that we are coming back to a policy of common security or of cooperation with the next years. They will deeply convinced that confrontation will be the main element of the international politics for the next year. These, and from the peace position, it's even a strategy, exclude that they are hopefully to have new disarmament negotiations. And also, above all, they had no illusions about new agreements about nuclear disarmament. They were very frankly and were saying nuclear disarmament is not on the agenda of the international politics now. And maybe this will change, but they were really skeptical. And a part of this is, and I think we have to say this very open, that they have strengthened their own military forces. They are developing their military budget, they are renewing their army and their forces, and they know and they want to strengthen their military forces. What does this mean concrete? We can discuss maybe in the discussion. So these are some points and some to international developments. Let me say some words at the end from the peace perspectives and the perspective of the peace movement. I think every discussion with Chinese is really disappointing because they don't see any short-term way for coming to disarmament, nuclear or conventional, for stopping arms race, and for changing the way to a more disarmed world. They were very open. They don't see any way for that. And the next point is that the key element of the foreign politics of China is Asia. They concentrate their forces on developing so many bilateral and multilateral contacts to Asian countries, to their surrounding countries. They were telling us they have borders to 9 Asian countries, about 7,000 kilometers, or 5,000 or 4,000 miles. So, and the main point is to try to develop cooperation and quite peaceful relations to all their neighbor organizations. If they are supportive to the political system or not, this is a second question for them. For us as peace movement or as peace activists, I think we have to strengthen and to develop more context to China. And I know that this is not easy, but I have the feeling that after the Party Congress and with the new leadership, they are much more open for international contacts on the civil society and peace movements level. And I think we should be open to develop these contacts. And on 2 levels, definitely on the track 2 level, more secret behind the scene contacts, but also on the level of people's diplomacy. And I think peace organizations and peace movements in the different countries, and this includes the United States and Europe, should develop contacts, discussions, and common events for the future. So that is a background that I'm very happy that the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation openly with other organizations will develop this international conference to the new world power structure in Asia under the circumstances to overcome confrontation and to come to cooperation in the region. For me, it was a learning trip. I learned a lot. I got a lot of new informations. I saw openness in many questions, but I also saw that there are limits in the Chinese international politics which they don't want to overcome. So it's not a common agreement with them, but it's an interesting part of discussions. And I think we should continue the discussion, should be open from our side for learning and for understanding our partner, who is, for me, a quite new partner with own interests, with own history. But I think it is worthwhile to learn and to try to get in contact with them. Thank you very much.
Reiner, thank you so much. I mean, that was really quite comprehensive and very helpful. So thank you for that. I'm going to start with 2 questions to you, and then we'll open it up to what now looks to be 11 questions or comments in the Q&A, and people are welcome to put more questions in there. The first, you made reference to China framing much of its policies in the context of common security, and I'd like to know how their concept of common security differs from, if you will, the Olof Palme origination of the concept.
You know, when you read the Chinese documents, you will not see so many differences because they are using the same words which are used in the Olaf Palme report, in the first report for 1982 and in the second report of 2022 developed by IPB and ITUC and the Olaf Palme Center. They exclude 2 points. They exclude the disarmament question because I can only repeat what I was saying. They are saying it is not on the agenda now when they are looking to the international political situation. And the second point, they divide the multipolar relations and the bilateral relations. And you know, the Olaf Palme report, very much in the preparation of the OSCE conference in Helsinki, was very much a multipolar process. And China very much also rely on a bilateral process between the two countries, Vietnam, China, or others. So that is definitely a difference. The next difference is more or less a cultural difference. China concentrates in its foreign policy very much on political developments, political relations. And the cultural relations, the economic relations, the ecological relations are not so important like they were in the development of the Common Security Reports in 82 and in 2022. And the third is the difficult question about human rights. And I think the understanding of human rights in China and the understanding of human rights in the United States, in Europe, has different histories, different expectations. And I think this is a part of a long-term discussion which reflects to the cultural, historical developments and also by China absolutely to the history of a colonial system. We should never forget that. So differences, but also many common points. And I think for international politics, which goes back to cooperation, there are a lot of points for cooperative relations between China and Europe, between China and the United States.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. My second question has to do with the context of the traditional competition, conflict between rising and declining powers. And certainly observing from, on the one hand, the United States trying to reinforce its hegemony over the Asia Pacific, and at the same time, the Chinese building military power to challenge it. One way to read this in terms of Chinese security interests is to have, if you will, a buffer, not entirely unlike the Monroe Doctrine that we have here. But with China having basically claimed ownership of 80 to 90% of the South China Sea and bumping up against other Pacific nations, how should we understand this in the context of China's policies and what's possible in terms of our peace advocacy?
For me, this is a very difficult question because on one side, there are definitely security interests of China, which we have to accept, that they want to secure their borders, that they want to secure their trade lines, and on the other side, they claimed historical reasons for occupying big parts of the oceans there, which is not understandable and which needs controversial discussions with the different parties. And I was always saying, when you have difficult differences between countries, you have to sit together at a table to negotiate it. I think this is the line we have to think about the relations to Philippines and to Vietnam. And they were reporting to us about the trip of the new first secretary of the Communist Party of China, the new president of Vietnam, to China. And the agreement was, next to a lot of economic agreements, that they want to have now a round table where they negotiate and discuss the differences about several of the islands. And so they want to sit together and develop arguments why one side or the other side is claiming the right for these islands. I think this is the only way we can go. The other way is to have more military bases to enlarge the military aspect in the controversial situation. Also, I think we can only say, and this is the consequences of the Common Security Report, negotiate, sit together, put the arguments on the table, and see how you can come to an agreement. And when you cannot come to an agreement, find a way how to live with the differences without using military forces and without enlarging the confrontation. I think this is the way, and also the lessons learned from the European politics in the 70s and the 80s. And I think there are a lot of conflicts. And I was very happy to hear about this discussion between Chinese and Vietnam leaders, how they reduce the danger of confrontation between the two countries by knowing that they have very different positions on some of these islands. I think you know the name, Australian Islands and others. So that is the only way. And it is a difficult situation, but it is a situation, and the Chinese were saying to us, they have problems at several of their borders. They have the problems with India at the Indian-Chinese border. They have also problems on other borders, and they were happy that they could solve the problem with the borders to some Central Asian countries and also with Russia. So they reduced the border problems, but they have them. And the basic of solving these problems could be only negotiations, cooperation, and dialogue.
Thank you. So we do have a number of questions here. I'll try to get to as many as we can. Some people on this call will know Jenny Clegg in Britain, and she asks, how helpful are China's initiatives on peace, for example, Ukraine and the Middle East? How should the international peace movement respond to their initiatives?
You know, for the international peace movement, from my point of view, it is very easy. All activities which bringing the wars in West Asia and the war in Ukraine to an end are helpful. And I'm deeply convinced that the peace process in Ukraine will not work without the international contact group leading by China and Brazil. So they will have a very important role. And the Chinese diplomats, with their pendulum diplomacy going from one main capital to the next, is definitely helpful for preparing the ground for negotiations and discussions. It will not be so quick like we hope, but I'm hopeful that these contacts of China also to Ukraine can lead to negotiations between the different parties. And Middle East is, from my point of view, even much more difficult because we have so much overlap from different conflicts in one region. But the Chinese diplomats try their best to bring the conflict partners on one table or to negotiate the reduction of military activities in the region. It is very difficult. And don't forget that China is sending a huge amount of human aid to the region, including Gaza and including Lebanon now. A lot of the human aid, which is not possible any longer to come over the United Nations and their subgroups, is coming from China.
Thank you. I mean, also just to recognize the degree of common interest between the United States and China in terms of especially oil right now.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit of tension between China and Russia over what a war with Iran will mean. A question from David Hartso asking you to drill down a little bit further on Taiwan. He asked, what did the Chinese see as a peaceful solution of Taiwan? What would it look like? And how could it come about from what you heard?
You know, let me say, I can only give impressions which I heard. And I think the main point for China is not to solve the problem. They know that the unification will not be so quick than they hope. But they hope that there will be more relations and the confrontation around the sea will be reduced. This means their hope is that the sending of military equipment to Taiwan from the United States will be reduced, that there will be more cooperative relations on an economic base, that there will be more cooperative relations on the working market. China needs exports and products from Taiwan and also vice versa. So the idea is to develop cooperative relations which are preparing a ground for more context, for more relations also on the political level. But I think they are quite clear that this will be a long-term process. And the problem is what they were always saying. The problem is not the bilateral issues. The bilateral issues could be played, but there is always the elephant in the room. And the elephant is the United States with the militarization of the whole region, which is for them the biggest problem by developing more sensitive relations between China and Taiwan.
Thank you. I would just say I don't have the title right, the author's name right with me, but I've been reading a book titled Taiwan, which does a very deep history of Taiwan. And when I send out the link to everybody, I will include the information about that book because I think it's very helpful in developing a much deeper perspective on that. So a question from Marjolaine Snipey, I guess. She asked if you think China might be open for cooperation with the West in the field of AI.
Oh, absolutely. That is, the problem is not, China is very open for any kind of cooperation. And above all, by all the new developments, they know that they are really very strong by IA, and their development at the universities, at their research institute is impressive. And they are giving a lot of money for new developments of AI, but they know that these new technology could only be used in international cooperation. And they are very open for this international cooperation. And up to now, they are also the winners of the international cooperation. This is the reaction of the Western countries is very obviously they want to stop the open development and the cooperation because they have the feeling that they are the losers of these cooperation. And China is definitely very open for any kind of these corporations.
Makes us hopeful. We have a question from Donald Smith, which will draw from a different part of your life and brain. How fearful and antagonistic are EU leaders towards China? Do they think the same way as American leaders?
The same way they could not think. They are much weaker. The influence of Europe in the national politics reduced day to day and year to year. So, no, they are not the partner for China is the United States. They believe they can play on the same level. They believe these are the two superpowers of the future. And they are not using these words, raising and declining. They believe that they have to be eyes in eyes and try to solve their problems. And this is also their hope. And they hope that the United States will accept China as a partner on the same level of eyes. That is their hope. Europe, the role of Europe in the future is absolutely not clear. And the European leaders today believe that their best position in this fight for a new world order is to be the junior partner of the United States of America and to give up quite a lot of their own interests to have this junior role at the side of the United States. This has many economic reasons. When you are looking to the big companies in Europe, they are not any longer the European companies. Many of these companies have about the pensions fund, and not only BlackRock, but BlackRock is a key player. They have US influence and partners. So there are a lot of common economic interests for the future, profit interests. The second point is that the Europeans believe that the new industrial policy of Biden in the United States is helpful for the survival of the capitalistic systems in Europe. And many of these companies are now going from Europe to the United States, above all German companies. The energy price in the United States for energy is 1/7 of the price for energy in Europe. This is a deep argument for many industries, above, for example, chemical industry, to go to the United States and to build new factories and new economic equipment in the United States. So there is a new concentration process between the big companies in Europe and the United States, which also unite more than ideological unification, also their political interest. That is, from my point of view, the way the United States and Europe are coming more and more together, but Europe are losing their own independent politics, even more than they are losing that in the past. And they are really becoming a new junior partner role of the United States. If this will be continue under Trump, or what will be the role of Europe under Trump, this is absolutely an open question and not decided. And the European leaders, I think quite all, are absolutely full of fear that Trump will win the elections. They are deeply hope that Harris will win and that they can continue these, I will not say unification, but this strong cooperation against the rest of the world. So this is, for me, in the new power structure, Europe is not any longer playing an independent role. It is more or less playing a junior role under the leadership of the United States of America.
Reiner, just to say that I saw a report this morning about a report out of a British think tank, basically urging the creation of a NATO bank as a way to preserve, I guess, Western European interests if we have a Trump presidency. And only to say, if we have a Trump presidency, the demands on all of us here in the United States will be extraordinary. We have a helpful comment here from Joan Wider, who reports that the Philadelphia Orchestra will be leaving for China later this month for its 13th visit, the most of any orchestra. So that's a little bit encouraging in terms of people-to-people diplomacy. There's a question from Douglas Roach, who's the former Canadian disarmament ambassador. He asks, how can we advance common security in public policies when the world has become so confrontational?
First of all, Douglas, welcome. It's great to hear that you are joining such a webinar. Confrontation politics is not new in history since 1945. And the question is, which power construction is possible to overcome these confrontation? In the 60s and 70s, it was a balance of the nuclear weapons, that both sides know that they could not win a nuclear war any longer, and that they have to find new relations between each other. This gave the free place and the open space for people like Willy Brandt and Egon Bahr, and also for Kennedy to prepare such a way of cooperation. And under the new conditions of a more multipolar world, I see the main players in the Global South. The Global South and the way of the Global South for a more multipolar world, and the power of the Global South for getting these multipolar world, and China is playing an important role in this. These open new ways of cooperation, which cannot exclude Europe. And the key question of more or less cooperation, on one side, the Chinese-US relations, and on the other side, the discussion about the new security structure in Europe. And I see that after the end of the Ukrainian war, and from my point of view, the Ukrainian war will come, maybe not to it will come to an end in the sense that the daily day-to-day killing will stop, open new ways also for cooperation in Europe. The world is too small, and the question of climate, the question of hunger and poverty, the question of all the ecological questions are so dominant that they will force even confrontational forces to use the cooperation element in their politics. And my hope is that with the start of more cooperative elements, there will be a new dynamic for cooperation and at the end for common security politics. That is my hope, because the alternative is really the end of the world. Because when we are coming to nuclear war, there will be definitely in Europe no surviving, and I think there are also many other parts of the world. So the hope is the new power structure in the world, which forced to multipolar world, which is always cooperative, and the elements of international developments like poverty and climate, which force also confrontational forces for using cooperative elements. This together, and now I come to the people's activities, with the wish and the hope of the people and the activities of people's movement, social movement and others, for cooperative relations. This could be a new power structure which leads to more cooperative elements in the international politics. So peace movement is a very, very important part. And, you know, we all have to do that. I will say it very frankly, that the weakness of the peace movement will overcome, and that we can act stronger fighting for cooperative relations in the world.
So just to say that I see a question from Cheryl Spencer, basically about women's reproductive freedom. And I would direct her to an article in today's New York Times that might be helpful for her. We have a question, maybe this will be the last one we'll see, from Liz Remerswal, actually from New Zealand. I mean, one of the nice things about the technology is we can have such an international session here. She asks, are there peace activists in China or Taiwan that we can work with?
You know, in Taiwan, there are some small peace groups, yes. But, you know, never forget that China is not a democracy in the sense of Western democracy. It is leading by a communist party, and the freedom for independent social movement is quite weak. There are a lot of partners for discussion for us, but peace movements as we know it, as independent political movements, so independent social movements, they are really not existing in China. That we have to see and to accept. We can change this in a long-term way, hopefully, but that is the reality. So please work with people, with institutions in China, scientific institutions, social institutions. There is a national peace group which is related to the power structure of China. We can contact them and work with them, but please accept that different countries and different societies have different ways to be organized. We can criticize this, but we have to live with it, and we should be very careful in overestimating our own development in relation to others. When you are looking to the Chinese history, there are many reasons for the development they have, and let's use the situation like it is, develop context, peoples to peoples context, institutions to institution, and context to context, and then in a process of discussion, we will see which will be the best organizational structures and forms in the future.
Thank you, Reiner. This has been a very rich session, and I want to appreciate the several comments in the Q&A that express their appreciation to Reiner and to CPDCS and Peace Action for organizing this. So to appreciate that. In closing, I just want to thank Reiner again. People on the webinar should appreciate that it's now, what, 2 minutes before midnight in Berlin. And so just an extraordinarily helpful webinar. I'm looking forward to sharing it with other people. I hope that people take a lot from it. It helps to inform our ongoing work. I want to again thank Mass Peace Action for co-sponsoring. And I want to thank Mariana Fernandez, who has anchored this just after doing her own international travel. So thank you so much, Reiner. Get a good night's sleep, and looking forward to working with everyone who joined us. Everybody be well and keep on keeping on.